And hello and welcome to the Social Justice Forum. I am your host, Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. Now, if you're asking the question, what's the show all about? We bring you a forum that discusses and provides a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities that many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights, helping us better understand and address the challenges. We invite you to stay connected to us. The Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. Our next guest, an author of numerous scholarly articles, essays, as well as reviews, and the author and editor of 8 books, one of which just includes the recent work, The House of Diggs, the rise, and fall of America's most consequential black congressman, Charles C. Diggs, Jr., and here to provide a cradle-to-grave account of Diggs' life, his political career as a Frederick Lippitt Professor of Public Policy, as also Professor of Political Science at Brown University. We're thankful for Dr. Marion Orr. And you got to help me with the P's, doctor. You got so many P's, including that PhD. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm well. Thanks for having me here.
No, I really appreciate it. I think it's really some critical and seminal work that you have to be able to talk about the life of a congressman, right, who's the first elected congressman in Michigan.
Yes.
And the work, the body of work that that Congressman Diggs really brings to the table. So first of all, thank you for coming and sharing.
Yes.
And I know that this is a biography, and so I guess I'll start off with the obvious of what really inspired you about Congressman Diggs to say, I'm digging in to do this biography.
I'm digging in. That's
I like that, right? Yeah.
Well, Darren, thank you. I learned about Charles Diggs when I was an undergrad student at Savannah State College, a historically black college in my hometown in Savannah, Georgia. I had a wonderful political science professor. His name was Haynes Walton Jr. Haynes, like the T-shirt Haynes.
Right.
And Professor Walton taught most of the courses at Savannah State, political science courses. And in almost all of his classes on American government, on cities, on Africa, on Congress, Charles Diggs came up. So I learned about Diggs when I was 18, 19 years old. I went on to get a PhD in political science from the University of Maryland, where I learned still more about Diggs and his contributions. He did so much. I also discovered that there was no biography on this consequential Congress member. And so after thinking about it and pondering, I decided to plunge in and write what is the first biography of Michigan's first black congressman, and I would argue one of the most consequential black members of Congress to ever serve.
So when you say that, obviously you've done your research. What gives you the perspective that Congressman Diggs had this, was that consequential?
Yeah. He served in Congress from 1955 to 1980, a very important period of time for American politics and black politics in particular. He comes into office in January 1955. One of the first things he would do would go down to Mississippi and observe the trial of the 2 men who murdered Emmett Till. That gave Diggs national exposure. And it also signaled that this new congressman, and he was only one of 3 at the time, when he went down to Mississippi to observe the Emmett Till trial, it sent a signal to what kind of congressman he was going to be. And he decided early on that he would be not only a congressman for Detroit, because he represented Detroit, but he wanted to be a congressman for all of black America. Hence, he did all of these wonderful things, not only for Detroit, but for people around the country.
Yeah. For yourself, you did a lot of research in this and looked at a lot of the backstories and stuff like that. As you look at his life and you look at his political contributions and his social contributions, what struck you the most about this work?
How persistent Diggs was in trying to address many of the issues that black Americans face in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. very persistent around issues of airline desegregation, for example. Many people don't realize it, but when the commercial airline industry started in this country, and it took off around the 1950s, it was a very segregated industry. And Diggs came in right away and began to use his oversight authority to push, for example, southern cities to desegregate their airport terminals. You could, as a black person, fly in the airplane and sit anywhere you wanted to sit in the 50s, before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But if you landed in Atlanta or Houston or any other southern city, you were discriminated against in terms of where you could sit, where you could eat, and Diggs used his power and authority to desegregate southern airport terminals before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It's one example of his early contributions.
Yeah.
A persistent person pushing Congress to do what was right for African Americans, using his capacity to build coalitions across the aisle with people in the civil rights community, with conservative Democrats, trying to build a coalition in Congress to get things done.
A lot of major accomplishments that he's had. And the reality is, a lot of people still don't know some of these major accomplishments. We talked about airlines for a minute, right? Talked about the work with Emmett Till. Let's go through a couple more,
Sure.
right? So where his impact can truly be felt.
Yeah. Well, one of the significant contributions Diggs made, Daren, is something current today. He was the Congress member who pushed the bill through Congress in 1973 that restored, and I underscore restored, home rule to Washington, D.C. Today, Washington, D.C. has an elected mayor, an elected city council, an elected school board. Prior to 1973, the President of the United States appointed the mayor of Washington, D.C. The President appointed the city council members.
Pretty critical at a time like this today, right? You know, if the president could actually appoint the mayor and if the president could make the appointments out of Washington, D.C., I mean, what we would be seeing today,
Yeah.
that's another show.
It's a constitutional issue. Congress has exclusive authority over the district. Diggs pushed through a bill that gave home rule to the district. Limited home rule, he wanted statehood, but he understood he didn't have the votes to get statehood at the time. So one of his big achievements was restoring home rule, bringing really local democracy to the 700,000 men and women who live in Washington, D.C. The other important thing that Diggs is known for is Africa. Diggs became the first American legislator to devote his time and energy around U.S.-Africa policy. Many people don't realize this, Daren, but the American anti-apartheid movement, which many people attribute to the 1980s, 1990s, actually started in Congressman Diggs' office in the late 1950s. He was an early advocate of our nation pulling away from that racist regime in South Africa. He became the first member in 1959. Diggs became the first black person to serve on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And he used his position on that committee to raise questions about what was happening in South Africa and why it was so that we as a nation was aligned to this racist regime. I attribute the election of Mandela and the fall of apartheid to Congressman Diggs' persistent work in trying to bring change to U.S.-Africa policy.
Because as we really look at it, we remember the United States was very much an advocate for the release of Nelson Mandela back then. The work against anti-apartheid, right? And then yet still you've got Congressman Diggs here who's saying, listen, on the United States side, I'm this guy, and he wasn't, he didn't know today that he'd be etched in history like this, but he was that gentleman who really was saying, listen, we need to pay attention to this, and in a time when America really wasn't paying attention to it. And he, in many ways, he was, a pioneer and a trailblazer.
No question about it. On this issue of African policy and U.S. African policy, Congressman Diggs became known among his colleagues as Mr. Africa because of his persistent advocacy. He went to Africa and visited more countries in Africa than any other congressman, even to this day. So he really was the one who elevated this issue. The U.S. government was closely allied with South Africa because of the Cold War. And because of the Cold War and because South Africa was anti-communist, we were aligned for many years with South Africa, despite apartheid, despite the killing of black men and women who protested it. Diggs raised this question consistently, so by the 1980s, 1990, people began to say, what is going on? Why? Why would the U.S. want to be aligned with such a racist regime?
Yeah. Let me take a quick break, come back more. We've got Dr. Marion Orr talking about the life of Congressman Diggs and very interesting work. Stay with us. And we're pleased to have Dr. Marion Orr, our guest here with us in the studio. And yes, he is professor of public policy, professor of political science and urban studies at Brown University. Also, if you want to know a little bit more about his political history, his history, I should say, previously a member of the political science faculty at Duke University. He earned his BA in political science from Savannah State University, a PhD in government and politics from the University of Maryland, College Park, and he's here talking about the House of Diggs, the rise and fall of Congressman Diggs. And we were sharing a little bit before the break, a little bit about the work that Congressman Diggs was doing in South Africa, how he's grown and his popularity began to really rise. I want to get here for a moment because when we talk about him and we think about congressmen and we think about some of the most influential that we talk about in that time, I grew up on a block in Harlem. It's called 7th Avenue, which is also known as Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard.
Sure.
When you compare Congressman Diggs, Adam Clayton Powell, you have this relationship that goes on, and there's this unique thing.
Yes. Adam Clayton Powell came to Congress in 1945 from Harlem, the first New York congressman who was a black man. Diggs came 10 years later, okay? So by the time Diggs gets into office, Adam Clayton Powell had established himself as the national black leader, especially as a strong spokesperson for civil rights. In fact, from 1945, until the rise of Dr. King in, let's say, 1956, 1957, Adam Clayton Powell was really the spokesperson, national spokesperson on civil rights. He attracted attention. He was a very flamboyant minister, preacher, very debonair, flamboyant, publicity seeker. So I argue in the first chapter of my book that Adam Clayton Powell captured the attention, the imagination of lots of people and reporters, but the person who was really doing the hard work around civil rights in the Congress, trying to get things done in terms of bills passed, coalition building, was this young congressman, Charlie Diggs from Detroit. He was one who understood that it required more than just one black member or individual to get things done. And hence, that's why he had in his mind to form what became known as the Congressional Black Caucus. Charlie Diggs was the founder of what is now called the Congressional Black Caucus. He understood that black members and others had to work together in coalitions to get things accomplished, and I believe he believed more in that than, let's say, Powell, who really was much more individualistic in his approach to politics. So In Congress, people talk about the workhorse versus the show horse. Congressman Diggs was a workhorse. No question about that.
And when we look at Adam Clayton Powell, obviously a lot of publicity surrounded his life. Congressman Diggs, publicity began to surround his life, but not in a good way. We talked about the rise, but I want to take a moment and talk a little bit about his fall, because he reaches this prominent height, and all of a sudden, things start crashing down.
Yeah, this is true. And it's interesting, you could do a whole lot of good in your community, in your country, and you do something bad, one bad thing, this is what follows you for the rest of your life. Congressman Diggs in 1978 was convicted of payroll violations in Congress. Diggs got into real financial difficulties. He, for much of his adult life, had a real difficult time managing his personal finances. He could never seem to get it right. Mm-hmm. And at one point in the late 70s, he found himself in dire position financially, desperate, if you will. I'm not trying to excuse it, but that desperation led him to engage in a payroll kickback scheme. He brought his secretary into his office and said, hey, I'm having some issues financially. I want to raise your salary, but the salary raise will come to me so I can pay my personal creditors. He told a woman it would only last for a few months. It went on for 2.5 years, okay? She eventually resigned, in part because she was getting tired of the kickback scheme. And once she resigned, the kickback scheme stopped because there was no one there doing it. Mm-hmm. In 1976, Congressman Diggs hired Randall Robinson, a young Harvard-trained lawyer who had a strong interest in Africa and especially apartheid in South Africa. Mr. Diggs, the congressman, hired Randall Robinson to be his chief of staff, and it was Robinson, doing his duties as chief of staff, who discovered that Diggs had been involved in this payroll kickback scheme with the previous chief of staff, previous secretary. And through my having obtained, Daren, the FBI files for Congressman Diggs, I was able to identify the confidential informant who picked up the phone and called the Justice Department and alerted them to the kickback scheme that Diggs was doing. And that person happened to be Diggs' chief of staff at the time, a man named Randall Robinson, who many people would recognize as the founder and executive director of TransAfrica, the major anti-apartheid organization in America in the 80s and 1990s.
For you, coming to this realization, doing the homework and the research, and finding out that Randall Robinson was the one responsible, had to be a little shock to you.
It was a surprise to me to.
Because a lot of people thought otherwise.
That's right. There was speculation. You know, the family, Congressman Diggs was married 4 times, mm-hmm. and he had issues with women. The family members always thought that maybe some disgruntled girlfriend knew about the payroll kickback scheme and reported him. So to this day, no one really knew how the Justice Department learned about the payroll violation. And my having obtained the FBI files from Congressman Diggs identifies the individual. His name is not on the file because it's redacted.
Right.
But it's very clear. The person is a black male. The person went to Harvard University. Randall Robinson was a Harvard law graduate. The person lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts. That's in the file. Mr. Robinson lived in Roxbury. The person was involved in Africa issues. Mr. Robinson was involved in Africa issues. You put 2 and 2 together.
You understand that it's Randall Robinson.
There's no question in my mind.
So I want to get this here. You do some great work here. and this is a story that's worth telling.
Yes.
But this didn't happen overnight. How long did you spend researching the life of Congressman Charles Diggs here?
Yeah. This book took me about 10 years to complete. I did extensive archival research. The congressman left his congressional papers at Howard University. And there in the archives are some 750 boxes of personal, congressional, and business correspondence and letters and memos that Diggs left. Let me add, Diggs knew that he was a significant Congress member, and he kept lots of stuff, okay? So I have all the Diggs papers that took lots of time to go through, but I didn't stop at the Diggs papers. Diggs was a prolific writer of letters, memos, and telegrams to U.S. presidents. So I visited and I pulled out documents linked to Diggs from every president that he served under, starting with Eisenhower, leading up to Jimmy Carter. So I have all of these wonderful documents from cabinet officials and others who were corresponding to Congressman Diggs. And finally, I interviewed some 30 individuals, family members and members of Congress who served with Diggs. And then the family gave me access to letters that the congressman wrote to his parents when he was in college and in the military. Can you imagine that? I have letters from an 18-year-old Charlie Diggs writing his parents while he was at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, telling them about the racial experiences he's facing in the Jim Crow South.
Right.
Letters from an 18-year-old kid writing his parents. His family had those letters, and they gave me access to them.
Yeah. So, from yourself, how do you take this? You know, you got the scholarly aspect, and then you also got the storytelling that's going on in here too, right? So how do you weave that together to get us across the finish line in such a way?
Yeah. You have to write it in a way that's going to reach the broad audience. This is the first book. I've published 8 books now. The first book that I wrote for a broad audience. And because this man was so interesting, so complex, it's sort of easy to sort of write about what he's doing and to make him come off the pages. There's lots of wonderful scenes in the book, for example, when he goes down to the Emmett Till murder trials, wonderful scenes of him, confronting Southern racism, his multiple marriages. So he's the kind of character that simply leaps off the page and I think captures the attention of readers. He was a fascinating man, and this is what makes for a good biography, the complexity of this person. Here's a man who devoted his entire adult life to public policy and who ended up, in the end, spending 7 months in a federal prison, and who, to this day, many people have sadly forgotten.
Yeah. You think about people like him, I think about Marion Barry, right? People who've had some great work, but then tremendous falls, from grace. But thank goodness there's a story that's actually being told, and you're actually able to tell that story for so many people that may never get to know who Congressman Charles Diggs was, to a place that, he'll be remembered and now definitely not forgotten because of this work. When people read this book that you've spent 10 years researching and writing and digging behind the FBI files and bringing stuff to our light that only, someone of seasoned scholarly aptitude would be able to do, what do you want people to take away from this?
I want people to see Charles Coles Diggs Jr. in his full character.
In his full self is what we say around the hood.
That's right. I want people to really see him as not only as someone who ended his career going to prison. But I want people to see the fullness of this very accomplished Congress member, devoted, dedicated public servant who loved this country. Diggs was a true patriot, and his life's work in Congress was simply trying to make this country live up to the true meanings of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and to treat Black Americans the way we should be treated. He was devoted to the cause.
I got less than 2 minutes of telling me, so I gotta ask this question and let you take it away real quickly. If he was around today, what do you think we'd be saying?
Diggs would be encouraging Black Americans and their allies to persist. He was a persistent legislator. That's one word that describes him, persistence. It took decades to convince the U.S. government to change its policy in Southern Africa. It took persistent, dogged persistence. And that's the kind of dogged persistence we need today. We can't pull back. We have to persist and push and demand that this country lives up to its true creed of equality, liberty, and liberty.
Yeah, so when it's all said and done, the American anti-apartheid movement that we see it was all pretty much birthed through Charles Diggs.
I would say so. He's the one who really used his congressional position. At one point, he becomes chair of an important subcommittee on Africa, and he used that subcommittee to educate Americans about what was happening in Southern Africa. Most Americans knew nothing of Africa, largely, and certainly nothing about Southern Africa.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, Dr. Marion Orr, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And an honor to
Thank
have
you so much.
Thank you for this work. Thank you for bringing these things to light, because the truth is that this is history. And it's not just history, it's our history. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. MarionOrr.com.
I was getting ready to say, so yes, so if you want to find out the book, Dr. Marion Orr, or I should say MarionOrr.com. And we want to thank Dr. Marion Orr for being with us. So, listen, we want to thank you for joining us here on the Social Justice Forum. Our guest, Dr. Marion Orr, the book, The House of Diggs. Make sure you check it out, MarionOrr.com. Come to the end of the show today. Hope you enjoyed this week's discussion. If you want to catch the week's edition, catch the Recablecast right here on BronxNet.org. And always stay connected to us. I'm Daren Jaime saying take care. God bless.